What if I told you a crew chief once hid a nitrous oxide system inside a suspension component so perfectly that NASCAR spent 7 hours tearing the car apart and still couldn't find it? This is the story of the most ingenious cheating device in NASCAR history and the mechanic who almost got away with it. Picture this. It's February 1976 at Daytona International Speedway. The air is thick with exhaust fumes and tension as teams prepare for qualifying runs that will determine the starting grid for NASCAR's most prestigious race, the Daytona 500. In the DieGuard Racing garage, crew chief Mario Rossi is about to attempt something that would either make him a legend or get his team banned from the sport forever. Darrell Waltrip's number 88 Chevrolet Monte Carlo sits on jack stands, its hood up, surrounded by crew members making last-minute adjustments. But while other teams are tweaking carburetors and checking tire pressures, Rossi is installing something that had never been attempted in NASCAR before: a completely hidden nitrous oxide injection system concealed inside a critical suspension component that inspectors would never think to check. This wasn't just about cheating to win. This was engineering brilliance applied to the dark art of circumventing rules. A cat-and-mouse game played at 190 miles per hour with millions of dollars and careers on the line. What Mario Rossi created that day would push NASCAR's inspection process to its breaking point and fundamentally change how the sport policed technical innovation forever. To understand why Rossi's device was so revolutionary, we need to understand what NASCAR was like in 1976. This was the era of creative interpretation, when the rulebook was more like a suggestion, and crew chiefs were part engineer, part magician. The sport had exploded in popularity through the early 70s, with television coverage bringing stock car racing to living rooms across America. Prize money was climbing. The Daytona 500 purse had grown from $176,000 in 1970 to over $360,000 by 1976. That's nearly $2 million in today's dollars. The cars themselves were still based on actual production vehicles you could buy at a dealership, sort of. By 1976, teams were pushing the boundaries of what stock meant. Body panels were acid-dipped to remove weight. Frames were reinforced with custom welding. Engines were blueprinted and balanced to tolerances the factory never imagined. The Monte Carlo that Waltrip drove looked like a street car from 50 feet away, but underneath it was a purpose-built racing machine capable of sustained speeds over 180 miles per hour. NASCAR's technical inspectors, led by the legendary Bill Gazaway, were in a constant arms race with the crew chiefs. Every race weekend brought new innovations designed to skirt the rules. Teams would offset bodies by fractions of an inch to improve aerodynamics. They'd use exotic fuel additives that technically weren't prohibited because NASCAR hadn't thought to ban them yet. One team famously built an oversized fuel tank with a basketball inside. When inspectors measured capacity with the ball inflated, it passed. During the race, they'd deflate it for extra fuel, but nobody had tried hiding nitrous oxide in a suspension component before. The wedge bar, also called a spring jack bolt, was a threaded rod that adjusted the car's cross-weight balance. It ran through the rear suspension, connecting to the spring perch. Turning it would raise or lower one corner of the car, changing how weight transferred through corners. Every NASCAR stocker had one. It was about as mundane a part as you could imagine, which made it perfect for Rossi's purposes. Here's where the engineering gets beautiful. Rossi didn't just hollow out a wedge bar and stuff some nitrous lines in it. He designed and fabricated a completely functional wedge adjustment system that also served as a pressurized nitrous reservoir. The bar itself became the storage cylinder, machined from high-strength steel tubing with walls thick enough to handle 900 psi of pressure while still functioning as a load-bearing suspension component. The dimensions were critical. A standard wedge bar was about 1.25 inches in diameter and roughly 18 inches long. After accounting for the wall thickness needed for pressure containment and structural integrity, Rossi had an internal volume of approximately 15 cubic inches. At 900 psi, that's enough nitrous oxide for about 10-12 seconds of full flow, perfect for a 2-lap qualifying run at Daytona. The release mechanism was even more clever. Rossi ran a micro-bore stainless steel line inside the bar's adjustment threads, invisible from external inspection. This connected to a modified carburetor spacer plate, with passages drilled at precise angles to inject the nitrous directly into the intake airflow. The activation system was built into the radio push-to-talk button. Hold it down for 3 seconds while in 4th gear, and the nitrous would flow. From the outside, Waltrip was just communicating with his crew. Nitrous oxide works on a simple principle that hot rodders had been exploiting since the 1950s. N2O breaks down at combustion temperatures, releasing oxygen that allows you to burn more fuel. More fuel plus more oxygen equals more power. The chemical reaction happens at about 570 degrees Fahrenheit, when the N2O molecule splits into nitrogen and oxygen. That extra oxygen increases the burn rate and cylinder pressure, generating tremendous power gains. In a racing engine already operating at the edge of detonation, nitrous is like pouring rocket fuel into a blowtorch. The 358 cubic inch small block Chevrolet in Waltrip's Monte Carlo was producing approximately 625 horsepower on racing gas. With Rossi's nitrous system engaged, internal calculations suggested they were seeing bursts of 750 to 775 horsepower. That's a 20-25% power increase at the push of a button. But power was only part of the equation. At Daytona's high speeds, aerodynamic drag increases exponentially. The difference between 185 and 190 miles per hour requires roughly 50 additional horsepower just to overcome air resistance. That extra 125-150 horses from the nitrous could mean the difference between starting mid-pack and having a shot at the pole position. The risk was enormous. If caught, the team faced suspension, massive fines, and the end of their careers in NASCAR. Nitrous had been explicitly banned since 1968 after Junior Johnson was caught using it at Memphis. The penalty for deliberate, premeditated cheating of this magnitude would be severe, but Rossi was confident his system was undetectable. He'd tested it dozens of times in the shop, checking for leaks, pressure drops, any sign that might give it away. On the morning of February 8, 1976, everything was in place. The wedge bar had been installed the night before, pressurized and sealed. The carburetor spacer was torqued to spec, its hidden passages aligned perfectly. The activation switch was wired and tested. Waltrip had been briefed on exactly when and how to trigger the system. Wait until the back's straight on the first lap, hold for 3 seconds, then release. Save the rest for the tri-oval on lap 2. During morning practice, Waltrip turned consistent laps at 183 miles per hour. Good enough for top 15, but nothing spectacular. Other teams noted the times. Dygaard was quick, but not suspiciously so. A.J. Foyt was running 185. David Pearson hit 184. The king, Richard Petty, was struggling with a tight condition, only managing 181. Nobody paid special attention to the number 88. Then came qualifying. Waltrip rolled onto the track at 2:47 p.m. under cloudy skies with temperatures in the low 60s, perfect conditions for horsepower. He took the green flag and accelerated through turns 1 and 2, the Monte Carlo's engine singing its familiar song at 7,800 RPM. Down the back straight, Waltrip pressed and held what looked like his radio button. Inside the wedge bar, a solenoid valve opened. 900 psi of liquefied nitrous oxide rushed through the hidden line, expanded through the carburetor spacer passages, and mixed with the incoming air charge. The engine note changed instantly, from a harsh bark to a deeper, angrier roar. The tachometer needle jumped as the engine gained 500 RPM without shifting. Waltrip's head snapped back against the seat as the Monte Carlo surged forward like it had been rear-ended by an invisible hand. The additional power was intoxicating. Turn 3 arrived faster than ever before, requiring Waltrip to brake earlier and harder. But the speed carried through the corner onto the tri-oval. As the car straightened, he triggered the system again. This time, he was ready for the acceleration, holding the wheel steady as the Monte Carlo rocketed past the start-finish line. The scoring tower showed 187.477 miles per hour, 2 miles per hour faster than morning practice, fast enough for the provisional pole. Lap 2 was even better. With experience from the first lap, Waltrip triggered the Nitrous earlier and held it longer. The Monte Carlo felt like it was about to take flight, the front end going light over Daytona's subtle bumps. Through the tri-oval, with the system engaged and the engine screaming past 8,200 RPM, Waltrip crossed the line at 188.901 miles per hour. In the Dygard pits, Mario Rossi kept his expression neutral as crew members erupted in celebration. They'd just put their car on the pole for the Daytona 500, but Rossi knew the real test was coming. NASCAR inspectors would tear that car apart, looking for the secret to their sudden speed. Within minutes of Waltrip returning to the garage, NASCAR officials arrived. Led by Bill Gazaway and Dick Beatty, they immediately impounded the Monte Carlo. The inspection started with the obvious: fuel samples, checking for additives or illegal octane boosters. Clean. They measured the engine displacement, verified cam timing, checked valve spring pressures. Everything was within spec. But they knew something was wrong. No car gains 5 miles per hour between practice and qualifying without help. Gazaway ordered a complete teardown. Off came the intake manifold, looking for hidden passages or modified runners. Nothing. They pulled the heads, checking for illegal porting or oversized valves. Legal. The exhaust headers were removed and measured. Stock dimensions. 4 hours into the inspection, they'd found nothing. But Bill France Jr., NASCAR's executive vice president and son of the founder, wasn't satisfied. He'd arrived at the inspection area personally, a rare occurrence that signaled how seriously NASCAR was taking this. France had seen every trick in the book, and he could smell cheating like a bloodhound. "Cut the fuel lines," he ordered. Inspectors sliced through the braided steel lines, looking for hidden passages or secondary fuel delivery systems. Nothing. Pull the oil pan. They drained 12 quarts of Valvoline racing oil and removed the pan, checking for hidden compartments or modified oil pumps that could inject power-adding chemicals. Clean. Check the roll cage. This was getting desperate. Teams had been caught hiding fuel cells inside roll cage tubing, but that wouldn't explain a qualifying power boost. They drilled inspection holes in the main cage tubes. Solid steel as required. 6 hours in, France was getting frustrated and angry. He absolutely knew, that Dygard was cheating. The lap times proved it, but they couldn't find the smoking gun. Every component they checked was legal, every measurement was within tolerances, yet the car had run impossibly fast. That's when France made his threat. Standing in the inspection bay with Rossi, Waltrip, and team owner Bill Gardner watching, he announced, "I'll cut this car into pieces the size of a silver dollar if I have to. We'll find it." He meant it. France had the authority to completely destroy the car in the name of technical inspection, and he was prepared to do it. Mechanics arrived with cutting torches and plasma cutters. They were going to start with the frame rails, then move to the floor pans, then start cutting suspension components into sections. Mario Rossi watched them prepare to destroy months of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of racing equipment. More importantly, he thought about what would happen when they found the Nitrous system. This wasn't just illegal, it was premeditated, sophisticated cheating. Criminal charges were possible. At minimum, he'd never work in NASCAR again. But there was another consideration. Rossi's hidden nitrous system was pressurized to 900 psi. If someone hit it with a cutting torch without knowing it was there, it could explode. The rapid expansion of superheated gas could seriously injure or even kill an inspector. Rossi might have been willing to risk his career, but he wasn't willing to risk someone's life. At 9:35 p.m., after 7 hours of inspection, Mario Rossi walked over to Bill France Jr. and said 5 words that would become legend in NASCAR garages. "It's in the wedge bar." France's expression went from anger to amazement to fury in the span of 3 seconds. The wedge bar. The goddamn wedge bar. A suspension component so mundane that in 30 years of NASCAR inspections, nobody had ever thought to check it for anything beyond basic functionality. Under Rossi's direction, inspectors carefully removed the wedge bar from the car. Even knowing what they were looking for, it took them 20 minutes to find the release valve and hidden lines. When they finally cracked it open, carefully, after Rossi warned them about the pressure, France just stood there shaking his head. The engineering was flawless. The execution was perfect. Had Rossi not confessed, they might never have found it. Even if they'd cut into the wedge bar, they might have assumed it was just a hollow tube for weight reduction. Illegal, but not nearly as serious as a hidden nitrous system. The penalties were swift and severe. Darrell Waltrip's qualifying times were disallowed. The team was fined $7,500, about $40,000 in today's money. Mario Rossi was suspended indefinitely from NASCAR competition, though the suspension was later reduced to 90 days. Bill Gardner had to write a formal letter of apology to NASCAR, but the real impact went far beyond the immediate penalties. Within a week, NASCAR issued a technical bulletin requiring all wedge bars to be solid steel or filled with foam. They instituted new inspection procedures, including mandatory disassembly of suspension components. The inspection process that had taken 2 hours before 1976 now took 4 or 5. The arms race between NASCAR and innovative crew chiefs continued, but Rossi's wedge bar marked a turning point. It proved that teams would go to extraordinary lengths to gain a competitive advantage, and that NASCAR's inspection process needed to evolve from looking for obvious violations to assuming that cheating was happening and working backward to find it. Other crew chiefs took note of Rossi's innovation, not to copy it, that bridge was burned, but to understand the mindset required. Gary Nelson, who would later become NASCAR's Sprint Cup Series director, said, "Mario showed us that the best place to hide something illegal was inside something legal. After that, we all started looking at every component differently." The technical brilliance of the scheme inspired a generation of creative rule bending. Teams began hiding tungsten weights inside body panels to manipulate weight distribution. They'd use acid to selectively thin metal in specific areas for aerodynamic advantage. One crew chief famously built an entire false floor in a car with a second fuel cell underneath. It passed inspection because nobody thought to measure the car's interior height. For Mario Rossi, the incident became a defining moment in an otherwise distinguished career. He returned to NASCAR after his suspension and went on to crew chief for several successful teams through the 1980s, but he was forever known as the guy who hid nitrous in a wedge bar. In later interviews, he expressed mixed feelings about the incident, pride in the engineering achievement, regret about the ethical lapse. "We weren't trying to hurt anyone," Rossi reflected in a 1995 interview. "We were just trying to go fast." That's what racing is about, finding speed wherever you can. The rule book said we couldn't use nitrous. It didn't say we couldn't hide it in a suspension component. Was it wrong? Absolutely. Was it brilliant? I'll let others decide that. Darrell Waltrip went on to become a 3-time NASCAR champion and is now a beloved television commentator. He's told the wedge bar story hundreds of times, each time with a mix of embarrassment and admiration for Rossi's ingenuity. Mario was thinking so far outside the box, he was in a different zip code, Waltrip said. I just drove the car. He was the genius. The wedge bar itself still exists. After the inspection, NASCAR kept it as evidence for the appeals process. It was supposed to be destroyed, but somehow it ended up in Bill France Jr.'s personal collection. Today it sits in the NASCAR Hall of Fame archives, not on public display, but carefully preserved as an artifact of the sport's wild early days. The incident also changed how NASCAR wrote its rules. Before 1976, the rulebook was relatively simple, a list of specifications and prohibited items. After the wedge bar incident, NASCAR began writing rules that covered intent as well as specific violations. The phrase, "actions detrimental to stock car racing," became a catch-all that allowed NASCAR to penalize innovation that violated the spirit of competition, even if it didn't violate specific rules. Modern NASCAR inspection is a high-tech operation involving laser measurement systems, computerized templates, and even CT scanning for certain components. Every part of the car is scrutinized, documented, and sealed. The days of hiding nitrous in suspension components are long gone. But the spirit of innovation that drove Mario Rossi to create his impossible device lives on. Today's crew chiefs push boundaries in different ways. Computational fluid dynamics to find aerodynamic advantages measured in thousandths of an inch. Exotic materials that provide performance benefits while technically meeting specifications. Electronic systems that operate in the gray areas of the rulebook. The game continues, just with different rules and higher stakes. The story of Mario Rossi's wedge bar remains a testament to human ingenuity applied to the pursuit of speed. It represents everything that makes racing fascinating: the constant push for advancement, the chess match between competitors and regulators, the willingness to risk everything for a competitive edge. It was dangerous, illegal, and completely against the rules. It was also one of the most brilliant pieces of engineering subterfuge in motorsports history. In the end, the wedge bar incident wasn't just about cheating to win a race. It was about the fundamental tension that drives all motorsports, the conflict between innovation and regulation, between creativity and control. Racing has always attracted engineers and mechanics who see rules not as boundaries, but as design parameters, who look at a restriction and immediately think, how can I work around this? That mentality built NASCAR from a regional curiosity into a billion-dollar sport. It pushed automotive technology forward in ways that benefited every car on the road. The same innovative thinking that led Rossi to hide nitrous in a wedge bar also led to safer cars, more efficient engines, and better performance across the board. Was it wrong? Absolutely. NASCAR is a sport built on rules, and breaking those rules undermines competitive integrity. But it was also magnificent in its audacity and execution. In a sport where advantages are measured in hundredths of seconds and thousandths of inches, Rossi found multiple seconds through pure engineering brilliance and courage. Today, when crew chiefs gather to share stories and pass on knowledge to the next generation, the wedge bar story is told with reverence, not as an endorsement of cheating, but as a reminder of what's possible when brilliant minds are pushed to their limits. It's a cautionary tale about the risks of going too far, but also an inspiration to think differently, to question assumptions, to never accept that something is impossible just because it's never been done before. The 1976 Daytona 500 went on without Waltrip starting from the pole. David Pearson won that race, leading 65 laps in his Wood Brothers Mercury. But nobody remembers who won qualifying that year. Everyone remembers the wedge bar, the ingenious, illegal, impossible device that almost worked. Looking back across nearly 5 decades, the wedge bar incident feels like it's from a different era, a time when racing was more dangerous, more creative, and somehow more honest in its dishonesty. Everyone was cheating, Some were just better at it than others. Today's NASCAR is more professional, more regulated, more corporate. Whether that's better or worse depends on your perspective. But one thing is certain, we'll never see another innovation quite like Mario Rossi's nitrous-injected wedge bar. It exists in that perfect sweet spot of technical brilliance and outlaw audacity that could only have happened in 1970s NASCAR. It was the perfect crime that wasn't quite perfect enough, the innovation that was too good to stay hidden, the cheat that became legend. What's your favorite piece of creative rule-bending in racing history? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on where the line should be drawn between innovation and cheating. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into NASCAR's wildest technical violation, make sure to subscribe for more stories of automotive engineering taken to the absolute limit. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries, just maybe not quite as far as Mario Rossi did.